My name is Loveth, and I'm 34 years old. What I overheard at my husband's office party didn't just shatter my marriage. It exposed a web of lies so twisted that by the time I was done, 3 people would be in handcuffs, and I'd be $2 million richer. But here's what nobody expected: the wife they thought was clueless had been watching, waiting, and building a case that would destroy them all. Before I tell you how I went from the perfect corporate wife to the woman who brought down an entire fraud ring, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for what happened when my husband realized I'd been 10 steps ahead of him the entire time. I smoothed down my red dress one last time before stepping out of the Uber. The Grand Marquis Hotel rose above me, all glass and steel and Chicago winter lights. December 18th, 7:47 p.m. Brandon's company holiday party. The same party I'd attended for 6 years straight, smiling at his colleagues, remembering everyone's names, playing the role of the perfect wife. This year felt different, though I couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the way Brandon had been distant for weeks, his eyes sliding past me at breakfast. Maybe it was the phone he now kept face down on every surface, password changed to something I didn't know. Or maybe it was just intuition, that whisper in your gut that something fundamental has shifted. The ballroom buzzed with conversation and clinking glasses when I walked in. Gold and silver decorations hung from the ceiling, catching the light from 3 massive chandeliers. A jazz quartet played near the windows overlooking Michigan Avenue. Waitstaff circulated with champagne and appetizers I recognized from the company's preferred caterer, the one that charged $200 per person. I spotted Brandon immediately. 6 years of these parties had trained my eyes to find him in any crowd. He stood near the bar with Richard Lawson, his boss, and the company's CFO. Brandon's hand gestured animatedly as he spoke, his face animated in a way I hadn't seen at home in months. I grabbed a champagne flute from a passing server and started toward them. Brandon hadn't seen me yet. Richard was nodding, his expression serious, almost conspiratorial. Something in Brandon's posture made me slow my approach. I'd learned to read his body language over 8 years together. This was his closing a deal stance, the one where he leaned in slightly, voice lowered, sealing something important. I paused behind a decorative column about 10 feet away. Not hiding, exactly. Just observing. The jazz quartet's saxophone solo provided cover for their conversation, but I was close enough to hear if I stayed still. The divorce should be finalized by March, Brendan said, his voice low but clear. My heart stopped. Divorce? The champagne flute trembled in my hand. I pressed my back against the column, suddenly grateful for the shadows. Good timing, Richard replied. We can't have any complications when the Denver promotion comes through. Victoria needs someone stable, someone without baggage. Victoria. The new VP who'd joined 3 months ago. Tall, blonde, Harvard MBA. I'd met her twice at company events. She barely acknowledged my existence. Trust me, Brandon continued, and I could hear the smile in his voice. She has no idea. I've kept everything separate. The lawyer said it's ironclad. My mind raced, trying to process what I was hearing. Separate accounts? A lawyer? How long had this been planned? While I was planning our 8th anniversary dinner, had he been planning to leave me? What about the house? Richard asked, joint accounts almost cleared out. I've been moving money for 3 months. She never checks it. The casual cruelty in his tone cut deeper than the words themselves. She never checks it. Like I was stupid. Like I was some naive housewife who couldn't read a bank statement. And the trust fund? Richard pressed, vests next month. $2.3 million. By then, the divorce will be filed, and I'll be free and clear. They clinked their glasses together. Celebrating. They were celebrating the demolition of my life. I backed away slowly, my legs moving on autopilot. The ballroom's heat suddenly suffocating. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to think. The hotel's courtyard was accessible through glass doors near the coat check. December air hit me like a slap, sharp and cold against my exposed shoulders. My breath came in visible clouds. I stood there, hands trembling, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. How long? When did this start? The questions multiplied in my mind, each one more painful than the last. While I was cooking his favorite meals, ironing his shirts, attending his mother's funeral 10 months ago and holding his hand through the grief, had he been planning this? Had every "I love you" been a lie? Every kiss goodbye before work, every anniversary gift, every shared moment over 8 years, had any of it been real? My phone felt heavy in my clutch purse. I pulled it out with shaking hands and did what I should have done months ago when my instincts first whispered that something was wrong. I logged into our joint bank account. The balance made me gasp out loud. $287.32.4 thousand. From the $180,000 we'd saved together. The down payment for our dream house in Naperville, the one we'd driven past every Sunday for 6 months. The colonial with the wraparound porch and the garden I'd already planned in my mind. Gone. I scrolled through recent transactions, my financial analyst brain automatically cataloging the theft. Because that's what this was. Theft, November 28th, transfer to BM Capital Holdings $45,000. November 15th, transfer to BM Capital Holdings $52,000. October 30th, transfer to BM Capital Holdings $38,000. BM Brendan Mitchell. He'd created an account in his own initials and just taken everything. Then I saw it. December 15th. 3 days ago. While I'd been Christmas shopping for his sister's kids, he'd made one final transfer. $175,000 moved to an account I didn't recognize. An account number that started with digits I'd seen before, somewhere. My hands had stopped shaking. That surprised me. Instead of falling apart, something cold and clear settled over my mind. The same clarity I used to have when I worked, when I'd analyze financial statements and spot the inconsistencies that others missed. I looked up through the courtyard glass. Inside, the party continued. Couples laughed, glasses clinked, people celebrated the holidays and year-end bonuses and the normal things that normal people celebrated. Through the window, I could see Brendan. He'd moved to a different part of the ballroom now. His arm was around someone's waist. Victoria, she leaned into him, laughing at something he'd said. His hand rested on her hip with a familiarity that spoke of months, not moments. Everyone could see them. His colleagues, his boss, the entire company. And nobody thought anything of it because I was just Brendan's wife. Invisible. Irrelevant. He thought I was stupid. He thought I'd never check the accounts, never question, never fight back. He thought he could erase me from his life as easily as he'd emptied our savings account. But here's what Brendan didn't know. Here's what he'd forgotten in his arrogance and his affair and his embezzlement plans. I wasn't always just Brendan's wife. If you've ever discovered your partner's secret life in the worst possible moment, if you've ever felt that gut punch realization that everything you believed was a lie, type "I've been there" in the comments below. You're not alone. And trust me, what I did next will show you that sometimes, the person they underestimate is exactly the person who destroys them. Stay with me for this, because the revenge I served wasn't hot. It was ice cold, calculated, and absolutely devastating. Where are you watching from? Drop your location and let me know if you've ever had to choose between confronting a cheater or strategically taking them down. What comes next will answer that question in ways you won't expect. I met Brendan 8 years ago at Maxwell Financial, where I'd just been promoted to junior analyst at 26. He was 31, senior account manager, confident in that way that makes a room feel smaller. Our office was on the 40th floor of the Willis Tower, and I remember thinking the first time he spoke to me that his smile was almost as impressive as the view. Your loveth, right? The one who caught the Brennan account discrepancy? He'd leaned against my cubicle wall, coffee in hand, looking at me like I'd done something remarkable instead of just my job. Someone had to notice they were double billing, I'd said, trying not to sound as flustered as I felt. Most people wouldn't have. You're thorough. I like thorough. That's how it started. Office coffees that turned into lunches. Lunches that turned into dinners. Within 3 months, we were inseparable. Within 6, he proposed at that Italian restaurant in River North, the one with the wine cellar where he'd somehow convinced them to hide the ring in my tiramisu. You're my partner, he'd said, sliding the ring onto my finger. In everything. Forever. I'd believed him. God, I believed him. The wedding was small, just family and close friends, but perfect. His mother Susan had been hesitant at first. I wasn't from their world of country clubs and generational wealth. My parents were immigrants who'd worked multiple jobs to put me through Northwestern. But I'd won her over eventually, or thought I had, by being exactly what she wanted for her son. Supportive. Presentable. Smart enough to help his career but not threatening enough to overshadow it. 3 years into our marriage, I'd made a decision that I'd thought was temporary. Brendan had been up for a major promotion, regional director, and the position required extensive travel and networking. Late nights, client dinners, weekend golf tournaments. It would really help if you could come to more events, he'd said one night over takeout Chinese. The other directors' wives are all there, making connections, smoothing things over. It matters, you know? The social aspect. I have work too, I'd reminded him, though gently. I'd been managing a portfolio of mid-sized clients, building my own reputation. I know, and you're incredible at it. But this promotion, loveth, it's our future. Our house, our life, everything we want. Once I make regional director, we'll be set. You could always go back to work later. Later. That word should have been a warning, but I'd loved him. I'd wanted his success. And somewhere in my mind, I'd calculated that stepping back for a year or two while he advanced wouldn't derail my own career permanently. I was 29. I had time. So I'd left Maxwell Financial. Told them it was to support my husband's career growth, which made me sound traditional and supportive instead of sidelined. I'd started doing financial consulting from home, small projects for law firms and accounting agencies. Freelance work that I could do between attending Brendan's company functions and playing the role of the perfect corporate wife. The country club memberships came next. The charity galas where I smiled and made small talk with women who introduced themselves by their husbands' titles. I'm Mrs. Anderson, Tom's wife, he's VP of Operations. The dinner parties where I remembered everyone's dietary restrictions and preferences, where I ensured Brendan looked good, supported, loved it. I was good at it. Too good, maybe. Because somewhere along the way, I stopped being Loveth who caught financial discrepancies and started being Brendan's wife who makes excellent beef Wellington. His mother's death 10 months ago had been sudden. Heart attack at 67, no warning. I'd held Brendan through the grief, planned the funeral, managed the relatives, handled everything while he fell apart. Susan had been his only parent. His father had died when Brendan was in college. The trust fund she'd left him had been substantial, and I remembered the lawyer's office where we'd sat for the reading of the will. To my son Brendan Mitchell, I leave the bulk of my estate, with one condition, the lawyer had read. The trust fund of $2.3 million will vest 1 year after my death, provided Brendan demonstrates the stability and judgment I've always known him capable of. The lawyer had glanced at me then, an odd look I hadn't understood at the time. Additionally, he'd continued, I'm adding Loveth Mitchell as a co-beneficiary, requiring both signatures for access to the funds. Susan wanted to ensure that any major financial decisions involved both parties. Brendan had squeezed my hand. Mom always loved how we were a team, he'd said, his eyes red from crying. I'd thought it was sweet. A testament to how his mother had finally accepted me, trusted me, wanted to protect our partnership. Now, standing in this freezing courtyard, I realized Susan hadn't been protecting our partnership. She'd been protecting me from her son. The signs had been there for months, maybe longer. I'd just chosen not to see them. The late nights that started right after his mother's funeral. Dealing with estate issues, he'd say, kissing my forehead on his way out the door at 8 p.m. The Miami conference in October that required 4 days when his previous conferences never lasted more than 2. The new cologne I didn't recognize. The way he'd started going to the gym at 6 a.m., coming back showered and energized in a way that used to be reserved for mornings after we'd made love, and Victoria. She joined the company 3 months ago, transferred from the Dallas office. VP of Strategic Accounts, which meant she worked directly with Richard and indirectly with Brendan. I'd met her at the September mixer, watched her shake Brendan's hand with a smile that lasted 3 seconds too long. That she's sharp, Brendan had said on the drive home. Harvard MBA. Closed the Patterson deal single-handedly. Richard's already talking about her taking over the Denver office, Denver. The promotion Richard had mentioned. The one that required someone stable and without baggage. I'd been categorized as baggage. The wife who needed to be shed before the next phase of Brandon's carefully planned life. My consulting work, the work I'd continued doing from home for 5 years, had been dismissed as a hobby by Brandon's colleagues. Loveth does a little bookkeeping, he'd say when anyone asked. As if tracking complex financial transactions for law firms investigating fraud was equivalent to balancing a checkbook. I'd never corrected him. Partly because I thought it didn't matter what other people thought, as long as we knew the truth. But also because I'd learned that being underestimated had advantages. People said things around me they'd never say around someone they considered competent. They left documents on tables at parties, discussed confidential matters assuming I wouldn't understand the implications. I'd collected information without meaning to. Overheard conversations about company restructuring, mergers, account irregularities. Filed it away in my mind the way I used to file away discrepancies in financial statements, not knowing if it would ever matter. Now it mattered. Now everything mattered, because what Brandon didn't know, what nobody except my clients knew, was that my little bookkeeping hobby had evolved into something much more specialized over the past 2 years. I didn't just do basic consulting anymore. I did financial forensics. Deep dives into complex transactions, tracking money through shell corporations and offshore accounts, finding the discrepancies that indicated fraud. 3 law firms had me on retainer. I'd helped uncover 2 major embezzlement schemes and 1 securities fraud case. I was good at finding money people wanted to hide. Very good, and I'd been so focused on my work, so proud of what I was building quietly while playing the supportive wife, that I'd missed the fraud happening in my own marriage. The joint account emptied. The trust fund vest date approaching. The affair with someone who had accounting access. The promotion to Denver that would make relocating easy. He'd planned every detail. Except for one thing. He'd forgotten who I was before I became his wife. I pulled out my phone again, this time opening a different app. My separate account, the one I'd opened 5 years ago when I started freelancing. The one I'd never mentioned to Brandon because he'd never asked about my work income. He assumed it was negligible, probably. Pin money for shopping, the balance showed $340,000. Every consulting fee, every forensic investigation payment, every dollar I'd earned while he thought I was home doing nothing important. I'd saved it all, invested it conservatively, watched it grow. I had money. I had skills. And now I had motivation. My phone buzzed with a text. Brandon, where are you? Party's in full swing. People are asking about you. I looked through the glass at him, standing with Victoria, his hand still on her hip. He'd sent that text while touching another woman. The audacity would have been impressive if it wasn't so pathetic. I typed back, just getting some air. Be right in, but I wasn't going back in. Not yet. First, I needed to make a call. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed. Derek Walsh. Former FBI, Financial Crimes Division. Now private investigator specializing in white-collar cases. We'd worked together on the Brennan Securities fraud case 6 months ago. He'd been impressed with my analysis, told me to call if I ever needed anything. I'd laughed it off at the time. Why would a happily married woman need a private investigator? The universe, it seemed, had a dark sense of humor. Brandon had always introduced me the same way at company events. This is my wife, Loveth. She's my rock. His hand would rest on the small of my back, proprietary and proud, while he recited the same script. Behind every successful man, right? The other executives would smile knowingly. Their own wives would nod in recognition, as if we'd all signed the same contract. Give up your career, support his ambitions, fade into the background of his success story. I'd left Maxwell Financial in year 3 of our marriage, and Brandon had framed it as mutual decision-making. We talked about it, he'd tell people. With my promotion to regional director, someone needs to handle the home front. Loveth is so talented at organization. She's supporting our future together. Our future. Always our future, never my present. The country club had been his idea, or rather, Richard Lawson's suggestion that Brendan had adopted as his own. The Riverside Club is where deals really happen, he'd explained, showing me the membership application that cost $50,000 annually. Golf on Saturdays, tennis on Sundays, networking dinners twice a month. It's an investment in us. I'd noticed he said us when it benefited him and you when assigning responsibility. You should really connect with the other wives, he'd say. You need friends who understand this lifestyle. The other wives at Riverside were a specific breed. Bethany Lawson, Richard's wife, had been a pediatric surgeon before her marriage. Now she chaired the charity auction committee. Jennifer Park had graduated from Yale Law. Now she organized the Christmas toy drive. Catherine O'Brien had run her own marketing firm. Now she planned the summer gala. We'd meet for tennis on Thursday mornings, and sometimes, in the quiet moments after our games, the truth would slip out. Do you miss it? Jennifer had asked me once, toweling off sweat. Working, I mean. Really working, every day, I'd admitted. Me too. She'd glanced toward the clubhouse where our husbands conducted business over scotch and cigars. But this is the trade, right? Their success is supposed to be our success, except it wasn't. Their success meant bigger houses we decorated, expensive cars we occasionally drove, vacation homes we maintained. Their names on the country club roster, their achievements celebrated, their careers advancing while ours became dinner party anecdotes about roads not taken. Brendan had specific expectations about my role. I needed to remember dietary restrictions for every client and their spouse. Know everyone's children's names, their colleges, their career plans. I had to dress well but not better than the wives of men senior to Brendan. Be charming but not flirtatious. Smart enough to contribute to conversations but not so knowledgeable that I overshadowed anyone. You made Tom's wife uncomfortable last night, he'd said after one dinner party. All that talk about municipal bonds and interest rates. Let the men handle the business discussions. I'd been correcting someone's misunderstanding about Federal Reserve policy, but apparently that was threatening. The worst incident had been the Lawson anniversary party 2 years ago. Richard had been discussing a potential acquisition, explaining the financial structure completely wrong. I gently corrected him, showing my math on a napkin. The table had gone quiet. Brendan's face had flushed red. Loveth took some finance classes in college, he'd said, laughing it off. Sometimes she forgets not everyone wants to talk shop at parties. I in the car on the way home, he'd been furious. You embarrassed me. You embarrassed Richard. Do you know how that makes me look? Like I can't control my own wife? Control. That word should have been a warning. I was just helping, I'd said quietly, help by being supportive, not by showing off. Richard is my boss. He doesn't need financial advice from my wife. I'd stopped correcting people after that. Smiled and nodded when they got things wrong. Let Brendan and his colleagues explain basic concepts to me that I'd understood since my freshman year at Northwestern. Became exactly what they expected, decorative, pleasant, intellectually non-threatening. His mother Susan had been cold to me initially. Old money recognizes new money, and immigrant family money apparently didn't register at all. At our engagement dinner, she'd asked pointed questions about my parents' occupations, my neighborhood growing up, whether I'd had proper etiquette training. She just wants to make sure you're suitable, Brendan had explained later, as if being interviewed for adequacy was normal. I'd won her over eventually through sheer persistence and performance. Perfect manners at family dinners. Thoughtful gifts for holidays. Never complaining when she called Brendan at 11 p.m. with some crisis that required his immediate attention. When his father had died before I'd met Brendan, Susan had maintained the family estate and social position alone. She valued strength disguised as submission. The trust fund conversation had happened in her hospital room 3 weeks before she died. She'd had the first heart attack but seemed to be recovering. Brendan had stepped out to take a call, and Susan had gestured me closer to her bed. You'll be taken care of, dear, she'd said, her voice weak but firm. I've made arrangements. The trust requires both signatures. Brendan tends to be impulsive with money. I'd thought she meant he'd include me in decisions. Partnership. Respect, now I understood. She'd meant protection. She'd known something about her son that I'd been too in love to see. The legal documents had arrived 2 weeks after her funeral, delivered by her attorney, Mr. Peterson, a man in his 70s who'd known the family for 40 years. Brendan had skimmed them quickly, initialed where indicated, passed them to me to sign. Just the trust fund formalities, he'd said. Mom wanted everything handled properly. I'd read every page that night while Brendan slept. The co-beneficiary clause. The requirement for joint signatures. The disinheritance provision for criminal activity or moral turpitude. Brendan had never read past the first page. He'd seen the dollar amount and assumed the money was his. He'd missed the safeguards his mother had built in, the protections she'd constructed because she'd known, somehow, that he might need to be protected from himself. Or maybe she'd known he might need to be stopped. What Brendan dismissed as my little bookkeeping hobby was actually a thriving forensic accounting practice that I'd built over 5 years of careful work and absolute discretion. I wasn't just consulting. I was investigating. The transition had started accidentally. One of the law firms I'd done basic analysis for had needed someone to track complex financial transactions in an embezzlement case. They'd asked if I could follow the money through 3 shell corporations and 2 offshore accounts that I'd found it in 4 days. $200,000 hidden in a Cayman Islands account under a false corporate entity. The lawyer had been impressed enough to refer me to 2 other firms. You have a gift for this, Gerald Hutchinson at Morrison & Klein had told me. Most accountants see numbers. You see patterns. Stories. You see what people are trying to hide. That had been 3 years ago. Since then, I'd worked on 8 major fraud investigations. Securities violations, embezzlement schemes, Ponzi operations. I'd helped law firms build cases that put executives in federal prison. My analysis had recovered millions in stolen funds. I'd kept it quiet deliberately. Used my maiden name, Loveth Okonkwo, on all professional correspondence. Met clients in their offices, never brought work home where Brendan might ask questions. Deposited every payment into my separate account at a different bank, the one I'd opened when I first started freelancing. Brendan had no idea that account existed. He'd never asked about my income because he'd never taken my work seriously enough to consider it might be profitable. The balance was $340,000. Every consulting fee, every investigation payment, carefully saved and invested. I'd used it to feel secure, to know I had something of my own. Now it represented something more important, independence. Options. PowerPoint. 2 of my current clients were law firms preparing criminal cases against corporate executives. The third was a private investigation agency that specialized in white-collar crime. They'd all learned to trust my analysis because I was thorough, discreet, and accurate. I caught things other people missed. The timing of transfers that suggested coordination. The amounts that were just slightly off, indicating someone had tried to hide tracks but hadn't been quite careful enough. The patterns and transaction dates that revealed secret meetings or shared decisions. Financial forensics wasn't just about following money. It was about understanding human behavior, the psychology of theft, the arrogance of people who thought they were too smart to get caught. People like Brendan. Since his mother's death 10 months ago, I'd been tracking our finances with the same attention I gave my professional cases. Not because I suspected anything initially, but because $2.3 million in estate assets required careful monitoring. I'd noticed the first discrepancy in September. A $3,000 withdrawal from our joint account, labeled office equipment. Brendan's company provided all office equipment. When I'd asked him about it, he'd waved it off. Expenses Richard needed reimbursed. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Translation, don't ask questions. The withdrawals had increased. 5,000 here, 8,000 there, always with vague explanations. Business dinners. Client entertainment. Professional development courses. By November, I'd started keeping a detailed spreadsheet. Every transaction, every explanation, every inconsistency. The pattern had become clear. Money was leaving our joint account and not returning. And Brendan had stopped discussing our finances entirely, which was a change from his previous habit of reviewing our statements together monthly. The trust fund vesting date was January 18th, 6 weeks away when I'd overheard his conversation tonight. The timing wasn't coincidental. He needed to file for divorce before the trust vested, get ahead of any claims I might make to marital assets, but he'd forgotten the co-beneficiary clause. Or maybe he'd never understood it. The trust couldn't be accessed without both our signatures. Mr. Peterson had been clear about that. This protects both of you, he'd explained. Major financial decisions require mutual agreement. Brendan had nodded, but he hadn't been listening. He'd been calculating how to spend money he didn't yet have. What he also didn't know was that I'd called Mr. Peterson 6 weeks ago, after the financial irregularities had become too obvious to ignore. The elderly lawyer had been surprisingly forthcoming. Susan had concerns, he'd told me over the phone, his voice heavy with something that might have been guilt. She loved her son, but she knew he had her ex-husband's weaknesses. Impulsivity. Entitlement. A tendency to believe he was above consequences, the disinheritance clause, I'd said. For criminal activity. Did she expect him to do something illegal? She expected he might be tempted, Mr. Peterson had replied carefully. The co-beneficiary structure was meant to prevent that temptation from becoming action. You were meant to be his conscience, dear. His anchor, except Brendan had decided to cut the anchor loose. I'd been reviewing Susan's trust documents again last week when I'd noticed another detail. The criminal activity clause didn't just mean Brendan would lose his inheritance if convicted of a crime. It meant the entire trust would transfer to me, the co-beneficiary, if he was found guilty of any felony involving financial fraud, embezzlement, or theft. Susan Mitchell had built a failsafe. If her son turned out to be what she feared he might become, she'd ensured his wife wouldn't be left destitute. She'd protected me from him even from beyond the grave. My forensic accounting work had taught me something crucial: everyone who steals money makes mistakes. They get greedy, they get sloppy, or they get overconfident. Usually all three. I'd spent 5 years learning to find those mistakes. Learning to build cases that prosecutors couldn't ignore. Learning to follow money through complex webs of transactions until the pattern became undeniable. Now I just needed to apply those skills to my own husband. I'd hired Derek Walsh 2 months ago, in October, right after Brendan returned from his Miami conference. Something about that trip had felt wrong. He'd been gone 4 days, which was longer than his usual business travel. He'd come back energized, almost manic, talking about new opportunities and potential relocations. When I'd asked about the conference sessions, he'd been vague. Networking mostly. You know how these things are, but I didn't know. I'd stopped attending his conferences after the 2nd year of marriage. Too boring for you, he'd said. All shop talk and bad hotel coffee. I'd found the receipt for the Miami hotel in his jacket pocket when I'd taken it to the dry cleaner. The Fontainebleau. Not the Holiday Inn Convention Center where his company typically booked rooms. The Fontainebleau meant luxury, romance, someone you wanted to impress. Derek Walsh's name had come up during one of my consulting cases 6 months earlier. The Brennan Securities fraud investigation. Walsh had been the investigator who'd initially identified the suspicious trades. Former FBI, Financial Crimes Division, 20 years of experience. Now private practice, specializing in white-collar investigations. We'd worked well together on the Brennan case. He'd respected my analytical work. Told me most accountants couldn't think like criminals, but I could. You see the moves before they make them, he'd said. That's rare. When I'd called him in October, I'd been direct. I need to know if my husband is having an affair. Walsh hadn't judged, hadn't asked unnecessary questions. Address, workplace, usual schedule. I'll start surveillance immediately. The first report had come within a week. Brendan, meeting Victoria Chin at a wine bar in Lincoln Park. The photos showed them at a corner table, his hand covering hers, her laughing in that way women laugh when they're being charmed. The second report confirmed they'd gone to her apartment afterward. Left together for work the next morning, affair confirmed, Walsh had said on the phone. Do you want me to stop here? I'd almost said yes. Almost decided that knowing was enough, that I could confront Brendan, end the marriage, move on. But something had made me hesitate. Keep going, I'd told Walsh. I need to know everything. That's when things had gotten interesting. Week 3 of surveillance, Brendan meeting Richard Lawson at an industrial park office in Schaumburg at 9 p.m. Not the company headquarters. Somewhere remote. They'd stayed 90 minutes. Week 4, Victoria joining them at the same location. Carrying a laptop bag. Looking nervous. Week 5. A man I didn't recognize. Older, expensive suit, briefcase. Meeting all 3 of them at a restaurant in Evanston. Walsh had gotten photos, run facial recognition through his FBI contacts. Name's Thomas Brenner. He's a corporate attorney, but not the kind companies put on retainer. He specializes in asset protection and offshore accounts. Walsh had started pulling financial records then. Public documents, business filings, anything legally accessible. He'd found irregularities in the company's vendor payments. Amounts that didn't match purchase orders. Companies that existed on paper but had no actual operations. This is bigger than an affair, Walsh had told me 3 weeks ago. Your husband and his boss are running some kind of scheme. I can't prove it yet, but the pattern's there. I'd used my own expertise to help. Analyzed the documents Walsh provided. Identified the fake vendors. Tracked the money flow as far as public records allowed. Between Walsh's investigative work and my forensic analysis, we'd built a preliminary case, but we'd needed more. Proof that would hold up in court. Evidence that couldn't be explained away. Give me another month, Walsh had said. I've got a contact in the company's IT department. He owes me a favor. I think I can get access to internal emails that had been 2 weeks ago. I'd been waiting for Walsh's call. Waiting for the evidence that would confirm what I already knew in my gut. Now, standing in this hotel courtyard, I didn't need to wait anymore. I'd heard Brendan confess. The divorce he'd planned. The money he'd moved. The scheme he'd been running. I pulled out my phone and dialed Walsh's number. He answered on the second ring. Loveth. I was just about to call you. I got into the email server today. You need to see what I found. Send me everything, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. And Derek? It's time to go to the authorities. But not yet. First, I need you to send specific files to specific people. Can you do that tonight? What are you planning? I watched Brendan through the courtyard glass, still laughing with Victoria, oblivious to the fact that his entire life was about to collapse. I'm planning to control the narrative, I said. He thinks he's been planning my ending. But I've been writing his. Have you ever had to become a detective in your own marriage? Have you ever found yourself analyzing your partner's behavior like you were building a legal case, because that's exactly what you were doing? If you've ever had that moment where you realize the person sleeping next to you is a stranger, someone capable of betrayals you never imagined, type trust broken in the comments below. What I'm about to tell you next is how I turned that betrayal into the most strategic takedown you've ever heard. Because here's what they don't tell you about revenge: the best kind isn't emotional. It's calculated. It's evidence-based. It's using every skill you have, every resource you've built, every piece of information you've gathered to ensure that when the hammer falls, it falls with the weight of absolute proof. Brendan thought he was 10 steps ahead. Victoria and Richard thought they were untouchable. But what they didn't realize was that while they were planning their future, I was documenting their crimes. And the evidence Derek Walsh just sent me? It wasn't just about an affair. It was about federal offenses that carry prison time. Stay with me. Because what comes next will show you exactly what happens when you underestimate the wrong woman. Walsh's complete report had arrived 3 days ago, on December 15th. I'd been sitting at my home office desk when the encrypted email notification appeared. The subject line, Final Analysis Urgent Review Required. I downloaded the files to my secure drive, the same one I used for my forensic accounting cases. 47 pages of documentation. Emails. Bank transfers. Meeting logs. Security footage timestamps. Walsh had been thorough. The scheme had been running for 18 months, starting in June of last year. 3 people, Brendan, Richard Lawson, and Victoria Chin. 3 separate roles in a carefully constructed fraud that had siphoned $4.7 million from the company. The structure was elegant in its simplicity, which is what made it dangerous. Brendan identified clients who paid on net 60 terms, companies large enough that their accounting departments wouldn't flag minor discrepancies. Richard, as CFO, approved the invoices. Victoria, with her accounting access, processed the payments, but the vendors didn't exist. Walsh had found 12 fake companies, all registered to P.O. boxes in different states: Delaware, Nevada, Wyoming. States with minimal disclosure requirements for LLC registration. Each company had a professional-looking website, generic enough to seem legitimate. Consulting services. Strategic advisory. Business development support. The invoices ranged from $15,000 to $85,000. Amounts large enough to matter but small enough not to trigger automatic audits. They'd been careful about timing, too. Never more than 2 fake invoices in the same month. Always mixed in with legitimate vendor payments so the pattern wouldn't stand out in quarterly reviews. The money had flowed through the fake companies into 3 separate offshore accounts. Cayman Islands. 1 for each conspirator. Walsh had traced the initial transfers, though the offshore portion was harder to document without subpoena power. The email evidence was damning. Walsh's IT contact had given him access to archived messages dating back 19 months. I'd spent 12 hours reviewing them, using the same analytical approach I used for my fraud cases. July 14th, last year. Brandon to Richard, spoke with V about the consultant structure. She's confident she can manage the payment processing without flags. Let's start with smaller amounts and scale up. Richard's response: agreed. I'll create the approval chain. You handle client selection. September 3rd. Victoria to Brandon, process 3 this month. Total $127,000. No questions from internal audit. We're clear. October 18th. Richard to both, meeting tonight, usual place. Need to discuss Q4 numbers and expansion plan. The usual place was that industrial park office in Schaumburg. Walsh had photographs of all 3 entering and leaving. Timestamps matched the email traffic. Late-night meetings that weren't on any official company calendar. By March of this year, they'd grown bold. Invoice amounts increased. The fake vendor list expanded to 15 companies. They'd stolen $800,000 in that month alone. May brought the first close call. The company's external auditors had flagged unusual vendor concentrations during the annual review. Richard had prepared explanations. New market consultants for the Denver expansion. Specialized expertise were bringing in-house gradually. The auditors had accepted it. Moved on to other line items. June. Brendan to Victoria, we need to be more careful. Jenkins in accounting asked me about Stratton Consulting. I told him it was Richard's project, referred him upstairs. Victoria's response: I'll create better documentation. Fake contracts, scope of work statements. Give them paper if they come looking. They'd learned. Adapted. Created a false paper trail that would satisfy casual scrutiny. Walsh had included his analysis at the end of the report. This meets the federal definition of wire fraud and embezzlement. Multiple counts, each carrying potential prison sentences of 5 to 20 years. The offshore accounts suggest additional charges of money laundering and tax evasion. I'd sat there in my office, reading those words, feeling something crack inside my chest. This wasn't just betrayal. It wasn't just an affair or even divorce fraud. This was Brandon committing federal crimes. Risking everything we'd built, everything his mother had left him, for money he didn't need. We weren't poor. His salary was $240,000 annually. Mine from consulting was roughly $120,000, though he'd never asked. We owned our home outright, drove nice cars, took vacations. We had savings, investments, security. He'd done this out of greed. Pure, stupid greed. I'd used my forensic accounting skills to create a comprehensive evidence package. Cross-referenced the emails with bank transfers. Matched meeting dates with invoice processing dates. Built a timeline that showed clear coordination and intent. Added my professional analysis, the kind prosecutors valued because it translated complex financial data into clear criminal activity. The man I'd married 8 years ago wouldn't have done this. The Brendan who'd proposed in that Italian restaurant, who'd held me when his mother died, who'd promised we were partners in everything, that man wouldn't have stolen from his own company. Wouldn't have risked prison. Wouldn't have betrayed everyone who trusted him, but maybe I'd never really known him. Maybe the man I'd loved was a performance, a role he'd played until it no longer served his purposes. The evidence package sat in my secure drive, 147 pages of documentation that would destroy 3 lives. 4, if you counted mine. Because even if I walked away clean, even if the law protected me, I'd still be the woman who'd married a criminal. Who'd lived with him for 8 years and never suspected. Part of me wanted to delete it all. Pretend I'd never seen Walsh's report. Let Brendan file for divorce, take his half of whatever remained, disappear into his new life with Victoria, but the rest of me, the part that had spent 5 years building a reputation as someone who found the truth no matter how ugly, couldn't let it go. Justice mattered. Consequences mattered. And if I didn't stop him now, he'd do this again. Different company, different scheme, same arrogance that convinced him he was smarter than everyone else. I'd gone back to Susan's trust documents that same night after reading Walsh's report. Pulled them from the filing cabinet in my office where I kept all our important papers. Read them again with the knowledge of what Brendan had become, the co-beneficiary structure I'd understood. Both signatures required for access to the $2.3 million trust fund. Susan had wanted us to make major financial decisions together, but there was a clause on page 8 that I'd glossed over during the initial reading. Section 7.3, Disinheritance Provisions. In the event that Brendan Mitchell is convicted of any felony, particularly those involving financial fraud, embezzlement, theft, or moral turpitude, his beneficial interest in this trust shall be immediately and permanently revoked. All assets shall transfer solely to Loveth Mitchell as the surviving co-beneficiary. I'd read it 3 times, my hands shaking. Susan hadn't just wanted to protect me from Brendan's impulsivity. She'd anticipated this. Known that her son might follow the same path as his father. I'd called Mr. Peterson the next morning, asking him to explain the clause's implications. Susan was very specific about that provision, the elderly lawyer had said, his voice careful. She'd seen what happened with Brendan's father. The insider trading scandal when Brendan was in college. Gerald Mitchell served 18 months in federal prison before the heart attack killed him. I'd known Brendan's father had died when he was in college. I hadn't known about the criminal conviction. Brendan had always described his father as a successful businessman who'd worked too hard and died too young. Brendan doesn't talk about it, Mr. Peterson had continued. Understandably. But Susan worried he'd inherited more than just his father's charm. She worried about his relationship with money, with risk, with the rules other people had to follow. The trust was meant to protect him from himself, and to protect you from him, dear. If he went down that path, she wanted you to have security. Resources. A fresh start. She knew her son had tendencies. I'd said quietly, she loved her son. But she wasn't blind to his flaws. I'd thanked Mr. Peterson and hung up. Later that evening, I'd remembered something. A conversation 3 weeks before Susan's death, when I'd visited her in the hospital after her first heart attack. Brendan had stepped out to get coffee. Susan had taken my hand, her grip surprisingly strong despite the oxygen tubes and heart monitors. Watch the money, Loveth, she'd said. Always watch the money. Men like Brendan, like his father, they believe they're entitled to things. That rules don't apply to them. You're smart with numbers. Smarter than he realizes. Use that. I'd thought she was confused, maybe medicated. But she'd been perfectly lucid. Warning me. Preparing me. If he ever does something stupid, she'd continued, remember that you have options. The trust protects you. Mr. Peterson will explain everything when the time comes. I'd squeezed her hand, promised I'd be careful, assumed she was just worried about normal marital finances. Now I understood. Susan Mitchell had built me an escape route. A way to survive if her son became his father. The trust fund wasn't just money. It was a weapon. One that would activate the moment Brendan was convicted. Standing in the hotel courtyard, my breath visible in the December cold, I ran through my options with the systematic approach I used for complex fraud cases. Option 1, confront Brendan tonight. Tell him I knew everything. The affair, the embezzlement, the divorce plans. Watch him scramble, lie, try to manipulate his way out of it. This would be emotionally satisfying but strategically stupid. He'd destroy evidence, lawyer up immediately, potentially flee with whatever money he'd already moved. Option 2, file for divorce immediately. Take my evidence to a lawyer, start proceedings before he could. Protect my assets, expose the affair. But this left the embezzlement untouched. Richard and Victoria would continue stealing. The company would keep bleeding money. And I'd look like a vengeful spouse rather than a whistleblower. Option 3, go straight to the police. Report the fraud, hand over Walsh's evidence package, let the authorities handle everything. But criminal investigations took months. During that time, Brendan would empty what remained of our joint accounts, possibly access the trust fund through forgery, disappear into his carefully planned new life. Option 4, control the narrative completely. The company's board meeting was scheduled for Monday morning, December 21st. Walsh had confirmed this from his IT contact. Quarterly review, year-end bonuses, strategic planning for the next fiscal year. Richard would be presenting the CFO report. Brendan would be there as regional director. The divorce papers were probably filed but not yet served. Brendan would wait until after the trust fund vested on January 18th, 6 weeks away. He needed that money before he could make his move official, which meant I had a narrow window where I held all the cards and he didn't know I was playing. I could control exactly when and how this information became public. I could ensure the board saw the evidence before Brendan had a chance to spin the story. I could make certain the arrests happened in the most humiliating way possible, with maximum witnesses and minimum opportunity for him to destroy evidence. The timing had to be perfect. Tonight, while they were all together at this party. While they felt safe, successful, untouchable. While Brendan stood with his arm around Victoria, celebrating what he thought was his brilliant plan, I pulled out my phone and called Derek Walsh. Send everything, I told him. But not to the police. Not yet. Send it to Brendan's email, Richard Lawson's email, Victoria Chen's email, and copy the entire executive board. The compliance department. The company's general counsel. And add one more recipient, the SEC whistleblower email. Walsh was quiet for a moment. That will trigger immediate action. SEC notifications require companies to investigate within 24 hours or face penalties. That's exactly what I want. This happens on my timeline, Derek. Not theirs. When? I checked my watch. 11:17 p.m. The party would continue for at least another hour. Long enough for them to get comfortable, drink more champagne, let their guard down completely. Send it at 11:47. 30 minutes from now. While they're all still here. While I can watch their faces when their world collapses, sometimes the best revenge isn't emotional. It's strategic. It's using every resource you have, every skill you've built, every piece of leverage you can find to ensure that when consequences arrive, they arrive with the full weight of the law behind them. Have you ever had to choose between confronting someone immediately or waiting for the perfect moment to expose them? Between emotional satisfaction and strategic victory? If you've ever had to plan your response to betrayal like you were planning a military operation, type calculated justice in the comments below. What you're about to see is what happens when you underestimate someone who's been watching, documenting, building a case while you thought they were just being the supportive spouse. Brendan thought I was home decorating for Christmas, planning dinner parties, being the perfect wife. He had no idea I was compiling evidence that would send him to federal prison. The next 30 minutes were going to change everything. And the beautiful thing? He wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. Stay with me. Because what happens next is the kind of public exposure that revenge fantasies are made of. The courtyard felt colder now, or maybe that was just my body adjusting to what I was about to do. My finger hovered over Derek Walsh's name in my contacts. One call. That's all it would take to set everything in motion. I pressed dial. Loveth, Walsh answered immediately. I was waiting for your call. Did you review the files I sent? Every page. Every email. Every transaction. My voice was steadier than I expected. It's time to send everything. To the FBI? I can have the files to the Chicago field office within the hour. No. Not yet. I watched through the glass as Brandon threw his head back laughing at something Victoria had said. Send it to the company first. Brandon's work email. Richard Lawson's email. Victoria Chen's email. Copy the entire executive board. The compliance department. The general counsel. Walsh was quiet for 3 seconds. That's an aggressive move. Once corporate compliance sees evidence of fraud, they're legally obligated to report it to authorities. This will happen fast. That's what I want. Fast. Public. No opportunity for them to coordinate their stories or destroy evidence. When do you want me to send it? I checked my watch. 11:19 p.m. The party was in full swing. Guests had moved past dinner into the drinking and dancing phase. The phase where people let their guards down, where phone notifications got ignored until they became impossible to ignore. 11:47 p.m. exactly. That gives them time to get comfortable. Time to think they're safe, loveth. Walsh's tone shifted, became more serious. Once I send this, there's no taking it back. The SEC whistleblower email means federal investigation within 24 hours. Criminal charges within a week if the evidence is as solid as we think. Your husband will be arrested. His career will be destroyed. His life as he knows it will end. He ended our life when he planned to divorce me while stealing my trust fund. He ended his own life when he chose to commit federal crimes. Are you sure about this? Because there are other ways. You could use this leverage privately. Negotiate a divorce settlement in your favor. Walk away clean without the public exposure. The suggestion tempted me for half a second. Take the money, avoid the scandal, let Brandon implode on his own timeline instead of mine, but that wasn't justice. That was just another form of enabling. Another way of protecting him from consequences while I disappeared quietly into the background. Send everything at 11:47, I repeated. And Derek? Add one more recipient to the list. The SEC whistleblower email address. I want federal investigators on this before Brandon has time to hire lawyers who might make evidence disappear. Jesus, loveth. You're not playing around, he destroyed us first. I'm just returning the favor, okay? Files will deploy at 11:47 p.m. exactly. You should know that I also coordinated with a contact at the Chicago FBI field office. Not officially, but I gave them a heads up that something significant might be coming their way tonight. If the evidence is what we think it is, they'll move fast. How fast? Agents could be at the hotel within 2 hours of reviewing the files. Maybe sooner if they're already working tonight. 2 hours. Which meant Brandon could be in handcuffs before midnight. Before the party even ended, the symmetry of it was almost poetic. He'd planned to serve me divorce papers, probably after the new year when the trust fund vested. Blindside me with legal documents and empty bank accounts while I was still reeling from the betrayal. Instead, I'd be serving him with something much worse. Federal fraud charges. Wire fraud. Embezzlement. Money laundering. Each count carrying potential prison time measured in years, not months. Send it, I told Walsh. Exactly 11:47. And Derek? Thank you. For everything. I just followed the money. You're the one who had the courage to do something about it. I ended the call and stood there for another moment, letting the December cold ground me. In 28 minutes, everything would change. Brandon's phone would light up with an email that would end his career. Richard and Victoria would receive the same message simultaneously. The board members would be reading evidence of a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme while standing in the same ballroom as the perpetrators. There would be no escape. No time to coordinate stories or destroy evidence. No opportunity for expensive lawyers to craft narratives or negotiate plea deals, just exposure. Complete and total exposure. I smoothed down my red dress one more time and walked back toward the ballroom doors. Time to watch the show. The ballroom felt different when I re-entered. Or maybe I felt different. Everything looked sharper now, more vivid. The chandelier lights seemed brighter. The jazz quartet's music clearer. I could pick out individual conversations in the crowd, identify who was drunk and who was just pretending to have fun. I spotted Brandon immediately, still near the bar with Victoria. His hand rested on the small of her back now, more intimate than before. They'd stopped being careful. Or maybe they'd never been careful, and I just hadn't wanted to see. Richard Lawson stood nearby, talking to two board members. Patricia Hayes, the company's chief operating officer, and Douglas Chin, who chaired the audit committee. Richard looked relaxed, confident, completely unaware that in 23 minutes his entire life would detonate. I grabbed a fresh champagne flute from a passing server and positioned myself near a column with a clear view of all three conspirators. Close enough to watch but far enough away that they wouldn't notice me observing. The minutes crawled. 11:32. A junior executive tried to engage me in conversation about holiday plans. I smiled, nodded, said something non-committal about staying in Chicago. He moved on. 11:38. Brandon glanced in my direction, did a double take when he saw me. His expression shifted, guilty pleasure replaced by the performance of the devoted husband. He said something to Victoria, who turned away quickly, and started walking toward me. "There you are," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. "I was wondering where you'd gone. You feeling okay?" The casual concern in his voice was masterful. If I hadn't overheard his conversation with Richard, hadn't spent 2 months building a fraud case against him, I might have believed he cared, just needed some air. "It's warm in here." "Yeah. They always overheat these ballrooms." He took a sip of his scotch. "Great party though. Richard's really outdone himself this year." Richard, who was helping him steal millions. Richard, who was currently congratulating himself on a successful year while federal prosecutors prepared to review evidence of his crimes. "It's lovely," I agreed. "Everyone seems to be having a good time." "Listen, I know these work events can be boring for you. Want to head out soon? We could grab late-night pizza on the way home." "Make a thing of it, pizza." As if we were still the couple who ate late-night pizza and laughed about office drama. As if he hadn't emptied our savings account and planned my disposal like a business transaction. I checked my watch. 11:44. 3 minutes, actually. I'm enjoying myself. Let's stay a bit longer. Brandon's phone was in his jacket pocket. I could see the rectangular outline. In 3 minutes, it would buzz with an email that would change everything. "Sure, whatever you want." He squeezed my shoulder. I should get back to the Richard and the board members. Schmoozing is part of the job, you know. I watched him walk away, rejoining Richard and the others. Victoria had disappeared into the crowd, probably to the ladies' room. Her phone was likely in her clutch purse, which I'd seen her set down on a high-top table near the windows. 11:46. 1 minute, the jazz quartet finished a song. In the brief silence before they started the next one, I could hear the ambient noise of 200 people talking, laughing, celebrating. None of them knew what was coming. 11:47. Nothing happened for 5 seconds. Then Brandon's phone buzzed. He pulled it out casually, probably expecting a text from Victoria or some other mundane notification. His face changed. Color drained from his cheeks. His eyes widened, scanning the screen rapidly. He looked up, frantic, searching for Richard. Richard's phone buzzed 3 seconds later. He glanced at it, frowned, opened the email. His reaction was different. Not shock, but immediate calculation. His eyes darted around the ballroom, assessing exits, witnesses, options. Then the board members' phones started going off. Patricia Hayes pulled hers out, read the screen, and her expression went from confused to horrified. She said something to Douglas Chin, who was reading his own phone. Both looked toward Richard. Victoria reappeared from the hallway, walking back toward the group. Her phone must have buzzed because she stopped mid-stride, pulled it from her clutch, and nearly dropped it when she read the email. Brandon was moving now, pushing through the crowd toward Richard. Not subtle, not calm. Panicked. People stepped back, sensing something wrong. Richard saw him coming and held up a hand. Stop. Don't. They couldn't be seen talking right now. But Brandon didn't stop. He grabbed Richard's arm, leaned in close, hissing something I couldn't hear. Patricia Hayes was on her phone now, making a call. Her face was set, professional, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. She was calling security, or legal counsel, or both. More phones were buzzing. The entire executive board had received the email. 15 people now reading Derek Walsh's evidence package. 15 people seeing emails, bank transfers, fake vendor invoices, offshore accounts. 15 people understanding that they'd just witnessed a major corporate fraud scheme from the inside. Victoria tried to leave. She headed for the coat check, moving quickly but not quite running. But a security guard intercepted her, polite but firm. A hand on her elbow, guiding her back into the ballroom. Compliance must have already alerted building security. Brandon's eyes swept the crowd, desperate, searching. Then he found me. Our eyes met across the ballroom. 30 feet separated us, but I could see everything on his face. Shock. Rage. Betrayal. And underneath all of it, the dawning realization. He knew. He knew I'd done this. His expression shifted from panic to fury. He started walking toward me, his jaw clenched, hands balled into fists. People moved out of his way, sensing the anger rolling off him. He reached me in seconds, leaning in close so only I could hear. What did you do? His voice was low, dangerous. What the hell did you do? I took a sip of champagne, keeping my expression neutral. Did I? Nothing. I'm just the supportive wife, remember? The one who doesn't understand business matters. This was you. I know it was you. The emails, the evidence, all of it. I have no idea what you're talking about, Brandon. Is something wrong? You look upset. His hand shot out like he wanted to grab my arm, but he caught himself. Too many witnesses. Too many phones that could record him assaulting his wife at his company holiday party. You're going to regret this, he hissed. Whatever you think you know, whatever you think you've done, you're going to regret it. Am I? Because from where I'm standing, you're the one who should be worried about regrets. Patricia Hayes was walking toward us now, her phone still in her hand. 2 security guards flanked her, professional and alert. Behind them, Douglas Chin followed, his expression grim. Mr. Mitchell, Patricia's voice carried authority that made people around us stop talking. We need you to come with us. There are some questions about financial irregularities that require immediate attention. Brandon's hand was still raised, frozen mid-gesture toward me. He dropped it slowly, his face cycling through emotions. Denial. Calculation. The realization that his usual charm wouldn't work here. I don't know what this is about, but surely it can wait until Monday. This is a holiday party, Patricia. We're all trying to enjoy ourselves. Mr. Lawson and Ms. Chin are already being escorted to a conference room. You'll join them. Patricia's tone left no room for negotiation. Mrs. Mitchell, we'll need to speak with you as well, but you're not under suspicion. Would you be willing to come with us? The formal phrasing was deliberate. Brandon was being ordered. I was being asked. Of course, I said. I'm happy to help however I can. Brandon's eyes locked onto mine. Don't say anything. Not without a lawyer. Loveth, I mean it. But I haven't done anything wrong. I kept my voice innocent, confused. Why would I need a lawyer? The security guards moved Brandon toward the conference rooms on the mezzanine level. I followed with Patricia, aware of 200 pairs of eyes watching us leave. Phones were out now, guests whispering urgently, the party atmosphere completely shattered. The conference room was corporate neutral. Mahogany table, leather chairs, windows overlooking Michigan Avenue. Richard sat at one end, his lawyer already on speakerphone. Victoria sat at the other, crying, makeup running down her face. Brendan was directed to a chair between them. He sat stiffly, his eyes never leaving me. Patricia remained standing. Douglas Chin closed the door, ensuring privacy but not locking it. Legal protocol for internal investigations. Mrs. Mitchell, we received evidence tonight of potential financial fraud involving your husband, Mr. Lawson, and Ms. Chin. The documentation includes your name as the source. Can you confirm you submitted this information? Brendan made a noise, half laugh, half snarl. She has no idea what she's talking about. Loveth doesn't understand corporate finance. She's a housewife who does amateur bookkeeping. I reached into my clutch purse and pulled out my business card. The one I used for my forensic accounting consultations. The one that listed my credentials and expertise. Actually, I'm a financial forensic specialist. I've consulted on 8 major fraud investigations over the past 3 years, including 2 cases that resulted in federal convictions. The room went silent. Brendan's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came out. Patricia took the card, examined it, handed it to Douglas. You have professional credentials in fraud detection, Northwestern, degree in finance. 5 years at Maxwell Financial as an analyst. Specialized training in forensic accounting through the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. I work with 3 law firms on retainer, tracking complex financial crimes. Jesus Christ, Richard breathed. You've been investigating us this whole time? I've been doing my job. Following money. Identifying patterns. Building cases. The fact that one of those cases happened to involve my husband is unfortunate, but the evidence speaks for itself. Victoria sobbed harder. I didn't want to do it. They pressured me. Brendan said it was just borrowing, that we'd pay it back. Stop talking, Richard snapped. Don't say another word without lawyers. Patricia's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her eyebrows rising slightly. That was building security. The FBI is in the lobby. They're requesting access to this floor. The FBI. Walsh had moved faster than I'd expected. The evidence must have been undeniable enough to warrant immediate action. Brendan lunged forward, trying to stand. The security guard moved quickly, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. Stay seated, sir. This is illegal. You can't detain me. I'm leaving. Actually, Patricia said calmly, as COO, I have authority to restrict building access during active investigations. You'll remain here until federal agents arrive. All 3 of you. Through the conference room windows, I could see the ballroom below. Guests were leaving now, the party effectively over. Phones glowed in the darkness, people filming, texting, calling friends with the gossip. By morning, everyone would know. Brendan Mitchell, regional director, arrested for fraud at his own company holiday party. His wife, the woman everyone thought was just a housewife, had been the one to expose him. The elevator dinged in the hallway. Footsteps approached. Professional, measured, purposeful. 4 FBI agents entered the conference room, badges displayed. Brendan Mitchell, Richard Lawson, Victoria Chin. We have warrants for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. The handcuffs came out. Real ones, not the metaphorical kind. Metal clicked on Brendan's wrists, then Richard's, then Victoria's. Brendan stared at me the entire time, his expression a mixture of hatred and disbelief. How could you do this to me? How could you do this to us? I countered quietly. I was your wife. Your partner. And you treated me like an obstacle to discard. The agents led them out, reading Miranda rights in calm, practiced voices. In the hallway, guests who'd lingered watched the perp walk. Phones recorded everything. Someone gasped. Someone else swore quietly. I stood at the conference room window, watching as they were escorted through the lobby, past the Christmas decorations and the holiday flowers, out into the December night where police cars waited with lights flashing. Patricia Hayes stood beside me. I need to ask. Did you know before tonight? About the fraud? I've known for 3 days. Since my investigator delivered the complete evidence package, why wait until tonight? Why not report it immediately? I watched Brendan's head disappear into the back of a police car. Because I wanted him to feel safe first. To think he'd won. To celebrate his victory before he lost everything. Patricia was quiet for a moment. That's cold.no, I said, my voice steady. That's justice. Have you ever watched someone's lies collapse in real time? Have you ever seen the exact moment when someone realizes they've been caught, when all their careful planning and manipulation crumbles to dust? If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or treated like you weren't smart enough to see what was right in front of you, type "never underestimate me" in the comments below. Because what you just witnessed wasn't revenge. It was consequence. It was accountability. It was the natural result of someone thinking they were smarter than everyone else, including their own wife. Brendan spent 8 years conditioning me to be invisible. The supportive wife. The one who didn't understand business. The one who could be discarded when she was no longer useful. What he didn't realize was that being invisible gave me the perfect vantage point to watch, learn, and document every single mistake he made. They say the best revenge is living well. But sometimes, the best revenge is being so thoroughly prepared that when you strike, it's not emotional or impulsive. It's systematic. Professional. Devastating. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that being underestimated can be your greatest weapon. Subscribe if you believe that consequences should match crimes, that betrayal should cost something real, that the people who think they're untouchable should learn otherwise. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your location and time in the comments. And let me know, would you have confronted immediately, or would you have done what I did and built an airtight case first? What comes next is the aftermath. The legal proceedings. The trust fund. The divorce. And the moment when I finally walked away from Brandon's ashes and built something new. Stay with me. Because the ending is even better than the exposure. The arrests made headlines by 6 a.m. the next morning. 3 executives arrested in $4.7 million corporate fraud scheme ran across every Chicago news outlet. The morning shows picked it up by 7:30. By noon, it had gone national. I woke to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Most from people I hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly curious about my life. A few from genuine friends asking if I was okay. 3 from reporters requesting interviews. The company's press release went out at 9 a.m., carefully worded by their legal team. Following a whistleblower report, 3 employees have been arrested on federal fraud charges. The company is cooperating fully with authorities and has implemented immediate measures to prevent future incidents. Whistleblower. They'd kept my name out of it initially, which I appreciated. Gave me time to process what had happened before facing public scrutiny, but by noon, my identity had leaked anyway. Someone at the FBI, probably. Or maybe one of the board members who'd been in that conference room. By 2 p.m., reporters were camped outside my house. News vans lined the street. Neighbors peeked through curtains, probably wondering what I'd done to deserve this attention. I called Derek Walsh first. The media knows it's me that I saw. You want me to handle them? I can issue a statement on your behalf.no. I'll talk to them myself. But on my terms. I scheduled a press conference for 4 p.m., gave myself time to prepare. Dressed in a navy suit, the kind I used to wear to Maxwell Financial. Professional. Competent. The opposite of the housewife image Brendan had cultivated. The statement I gave was brief but precise. Yes, I'd provided evidence to authorities. No, I wasn't just a housewife with a grudge. I was a financial forensics specialist who'd been working in the field for 5 years. I'd identified patterns of fraud, coordinated with a licensed investigator, and submitted comprehensive documentation to appropriate channels. My expertise is in following money and identifying criminal behavior, I told the cameras. The fact that one of the criminals happened to be my husband is unfortunate, but it doesn't change my professional responsibility to report fraud when I find it. The reporters loved it. The wife who caught them all became the headline by evening news. Social media exploded with commentary. Half the internet called me a hero. The other half called me a vindictive spouse who'd destroyed her husband's life. I didn't care about either narrative. I cared about the truth, the company called that evening. Patricia Hayes, the COO, requested a meeting. I agreed to come to their offices the next morning, away from the media circus. We owe you an apology, Patricia said when we sat down in her office. And our gratitude. The board had suspicions about irregularities, but we couldn't pin down the source. Your evidence gave us everything we needed. I'm glad it helped. It did more than help. You saved this company millions in future losses and prevented the fraud from spreading. We're offering you a position. Director of Financial Compliance. Full-time, $280,000 annually, complete benefits package, and a signing bonus of $100,000 for the recovery you facilitated. I'd expected maybe a consulting contract. Not a full executive position. I'll need to think about it. Of course. But Loveth? You have real talent for this. The kind of analytical mind we need protecting our assets. Consider it seriously. I drove home past the news vans, thinking about Patricia's offer. A real career again. Not consulting from home, but actual executive-level work. The kind of position I'd left 8 years ago to support Brendan's ambitions, the kind of position I deserved. Mr. Peterson called 3 days after the arrests, requesting a meeting to discuss the trust fund. His office was exactly what you'd expect from a lawyer who'd practiced for 40 years. Dark wood, leather-bound books, the faint smell of old paper and expensive scotch. He gestured me to a chair across from his mahogany desk. I'm sorry it came to this, he said, pulling out a file labeled Mitchell Family Trust. Susan hoped Brandon would prove her wrong. That he'd be better than his father. But he wasn't. No. He wasn't. Mr. Peterson opened the file, showing me documents I'd already read but never fully understood. The disinheritance clause is clear. Criminal conviction, particularly for financial crimes, results in complete forfeiture of beneficial interest. So Brandon gets nothing, correct? The entire $2.3 million transfers to you as the surviving co-beneficiary. Susan structured it this way deliberately. If Brandon followed his father's path, she wanted you protected. Provided for, the money felt heavy. Not the amount, but the reasoning behind it. Susan had known, or at least suspected, that her son might destroy himself. She built me a safety net for that exact scenario. There's one complication, Mr. Peterson continued. Brandon's attorney is attempting to challenge the disinheritance clause. Claims it's punitive and should be voided. Can they do that? They can try. But criminal forfeiture clauses are common in trusts, and this one was properly structured. I don't expect a judge to side with a convicted felon trying to claim inheritance from the mother who specifically disinherited him for criminal behavior. The hearing happened 2 weeks later. Brandon appeared via video link from Cook County Jail, his orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the expensive suits he used to wear. His lawyer argued that the trust clause was vindictive, that Susan couldn't have anticipated these specific circumstances. The judge, a woman in her 60s with zero patience for nonsense, cut him off mid-sentence. Your client committed multiple federal felonies involving financial fraud. Mrs. Mitchell's trust explicitly disinherits beneficiaries who commit such crimes. The clause is clear, legal, and appropriate. Motion denied. Brandon's lawyer tried one more time. Your Honor, my client's wife stands to gain millions from his conviction. She has motive to have fabricated evidence, counselor. The judge's voice went cold. Are you suggesting that the FBI, the SEC, and your client's own company fabricated evidence? That seems unlikely. Your client committed crimes. He forfeited his inheritance. That's how consequences work. We're done here. The trust fund transferred to my account 3 days later. $2.3 million, plus the $340,000 I'd already saved. I was, quite suddenly, independently wealthy. The divorce proceedings were almost anticlimactic after that. I filed, citing fraud and infidelity. Brandon had no assets to claim, no grounds to contest. Our joint accounts had been frozen as part of the criminal investigation. The house was in my name only, purchased before the marriage. 6 weeks after his arrest, the divorce was finalized. 8 years of marriage ended with a judge's signature and zero fanfare. I kept my married name, not for him, but because Loveth Mitchell was the name on my forensic accounting credentials. The name my clients knew. Changing it would be inconvenient. Besides, I'd earned the right to define what that name meant. Not Brendan's wife. Just Loveth Mitchell, financial crime specialist. I accepted Patricia's job offer, but with conditions. I'd start after the media attention died down. I'd maintain my consulting practice on the side. And I wanted full authority to implement new compliance protocols without board interference. They agreed to everything. My first day back in a corporate office in 5 years felt surreal. Executive floor, corner office, assistant who brought me coffee without being asked. The other executives treated me with careful respect, the kind reserved for people who'd proven they couldn't be underestimated, but the real vindication came from outside the company. 3 Fortune 500 corporations reached out within a month, requesting my services. They'd seen the news coverage, read about my forensic work, wanted that level of expertise protecting their assets. My consulting rate tripled overnight. The wife who caught them all became a professional brand instead of a tabloid headline. Media interviews focused less on the scandal and more on my expertise. Business journals profiled my career trajectory. A financial crimes podcast requested a 3-part interview series. You're becoming famous, Derek Walsh said during one of our check-ins. The fraud detective who started by detecting fraud in her own marriage. I asked that good or bad, depends. Are you planning to leverage it? I was. Within 6 months, I'd launched my own firm. Mitchell Financial Forensics. Specialized in corporate fraud detection, embezzlement investigation, asset recovery. 3 full-time analysts, partnerships with law firms in 5 states, clients that included companies I'd once only read about in business school. The girl who'd left Maxwell Financial to support her husband's career had become the woman those same companies hired to catch their criminals. My former colleagues from Maxwell reached out, the ones who'd wondered where I'd disappeared to 8 years ago. We met for drinks, and I told them the full story. You've been doing this the whole time? Jennifer Park, my old cubicle neighbor, shook her head in amazement. Well, we thought you'd just quit to be a housewife. Being underestimated has advantages, I said. People say things around you they'd never say to someone they respected. That's cold. I love it. I bought a penthouse in March, 8 months after Brendan's arrest. 40th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, view of the entire Chicago skyline. Paid cash from my own money, not the trust fund. That felt important somehow. The trust fund money I invested conservatively. Set up accounts for future security, charitable donations, the life I wanted to build without the shadow of Brendan's crimes funding it. I dated occasionally. Carefully. Men who had their own careers, their own money, their own identities. Nobody who needed me to be smaller so they could feel bigger. Brendan's sentencing hearing happened in September. 7 years federal prison for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Victoria got 5 years. Richard got 9, his position as CFO making his betrayal more severe in the judge's eyes. I didn't attend the hearing. Didn't need to. That chapter was finished. I never visited Brendan in prison. Never wrote letters or took his calls. People asked if I felt guilty, if I regretted exposing him so publicly, if I wished I'd handled it differently. The answer was always no. He'd made his choices. Planned my disposal. Stolen our money. Committed federal crimes. I'd simply documented his actions and reported them to appropriate authorities. That wasn't revenge. That was responsibility. Some nights, I stood at my penthouse windows, looking out at the city lights, and thought about the woman I'd been a year ago. The one who smoothed down her red dress and walked into that hotel party expecting nothing more than another boring evening of corporate networking. That she'd been strong, but she hadn't known it yet. Hadn't understood that all those years of being dismissed and underestimated had actually been preparing her for something bigger. I wasn't that woman anymore. But I was grateful for her. For her patience. Her watchfulness. Her refusal to completely disappear even when everyone expected her to. She'd kept records. Built skills. Maintained independence. And when the moment came, she'd been ready. Trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, investigate. When someone treats you like you're stupid, prove them wrong. And always maintain your own money, your own skills, your own identity separate from anyone else's narrative. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated or dismissed or treated like you didn't matter, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let them know that being invisible can be temporary. That skills can be hidden until you're ready to use them. That consequences are real, even for people who think they're above them. Where are you watching from right now? What time is it there? Drop your location in the comments below, and let me know, would you have done what I did, or would you have chosen differently? Thank you for being here. For listening to my story. For understanding that sometimes, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just truth, delivered at exactly the right moment. Brendan thought he was writing my ending. Planning my disposal, erasing me from his carefully constructed future. He had no idea I was writing his instead.